It was a quiet Saturday morning when I rolled my Harley into the driveway, polishing it before heading to a video briefing with the state attorney. This was a high-stakes meeting. Evidence, deadlines, and my reputation all balanced on the edge of my preparation. That's when Karen from the HOA strutted over with her teenage son. Without so much as a greeting, he pointed at my Harley and said, "I want that one. Give it to me." I thought it was a joke. I laughed lightly, but Karen's face hardened. "If you're a real neighbor, you'll let my son ride it. You don't even use it that much." I declined politely, explaining that it wasn't a toy. It was my motorcycle, my investment, and my passion. Minutes later, as I logged into the attorney briefing, blue lights flashed outside. Karen had called the cops, claiming I threatened her child over a bike. The officers were professional, but once they learned I was briefing the state attorney in real time, the entire situation flipped. Karen's credibility crumbled under her entitlement, and her son sulked away empty-handed. The Harley stayed in my driveway. My integrity stayed intact. But the story became neighborhood legend. How one HOA Karen tried to rewrite property rights, only to crash head-on into reality.
Entitlement versus ownership is a conflict that is played out in countless forms across human history, and it remains a very relevant issue in our daily lives. When someone feels entitled to what another person owns, whether it is something as small as a tool in the garage or as significant as a vehicle or a home, the clash often arises because of a misunderstanding of what ownership really means. Ownership is not simply about having possession of an item in a given moment. It is about the effort, resources, and responsibility tied to that item. In the case of something like a Harley motorcycle, it is not just a machine sitting in a driveway. It represents years of saving, maintaining, and respecting something that carries both financial and emotional value. When an individual, or in this case a neighbor's child, demands access to it simply because they desire it, the concept of entitlement comes sharply into focus. Entitlement tends to disregard the process of earning. When a person feels entitled, they skip over the recognition that someone else has invested time, energy, and often personal sacrifice to acquire or achieve what they now enjoy. It replaces gratitude with expectation, and effort with assumption. This is why entitlement is so frustrating to those who have worked hard to achieve something. To be told that your possessions or accomplishments should be shared or given away simply because another person wants them undermines the entire principle of reward through effort. It also diminishes the respect we ought to have for each other's boundaries, because at its core, respecting ownership is about respecting people. Another important dimension of ownership is responsibility. Owning something valuable means more than having the right to use it. It also means bearing the responsibility for its care, safety, and potential consequences. A motorcycle, for instance, is not a toy. It requires licensing, training, awareness of laws, and careful upkeep. It carries risks, both for the rider and for others on the road. To casually demand the use of such a machine without acknowledging these responsibilities shows a lack of understanding of what ownership entails. It is easy to see the polished chrome and the thrill of speed, but far harder to appreciate the maintenance schedules, the insurance premiums, the licensing fees, and the hours of learning how to ride safely. Ownership carries weight, and entitlement often ignores that weight altogether. The distinction between entitlement and ownership also provides an educational lesson in community living. In any neighborhood, people live in close proximity to one another, and the lines between what is personal and what is communal can become blurred. A shared park or pool might foster the idea that everything in a community is open for use, but that is not true. Personal property remains personal regardless of how visible it is to others. A motorcycle in a driveway, a car parked on the street, or even a garden carefully cultivated over months are not open invitations for others to take or use. Learning to respect these boundaries is essential not only for harmony in neighborhoods, but for broader social cooperation. Communities thrive when respect is mutual, and they fracture when entitlement overrides consideration. Furthermore, entitlement often breeds conflict because it creates unrealistic expectations. When a person expects to gain access to something they have not earned, they set themselves up for disappointment, and when that expectation is denied, frustration easily turns into hostility. This is why entitlement can escalate into arguments, disputes, and even legal trouble, as seen in the story of calling the police over a denied request. Ownership, on the other hand, provides clarity. It sets firm boundaries by establishing who is responsible for a particular thing and who is not. When those boundaries are understood and respected, conflict becomes less likely. At its heart, the conversation about entitlement versus ownership is not just about motorcycles, cars, or houses. It's about character. Respecting ownership shows maturity, discipline, and empathy because it requires acknowledging that others have worked for what they have and that we are not automatically owed access to their possessions. Entitlement, in contrast, reflects a lack of those qualities. It reveals impatience, disregard for effort, and an inflated sense of self-importance. Educating ourselves and others about this difference helps build stronger individuals and communities, because when people value ownership, they also value fairness, effort, and mutual respect. The larger lesson here is that entitlement may create temporary demands, but ownership builds lasting respect. Those who understand the value of ownership are less likely to demand what does not belong to them and more likely to work toward achieving their own goals. In contrast, those who lean on entitlement will continue to feel dissatisfaction because expecting rewards without effort is a mindset that never brings true fulfillment. Recognizing this distinction allows us not only to avoid unnecessary conflict, but also to instill a deeper sense of responsibility in ourselves and others. It teaches us that if we want something, whether it's a Harley or any other symbol of accomplishment, the path to it lies in effort, persistence, and respect for those who have already earned what they own.
False accusations are one of the most damaging weapons in any conflict because they attack not just a person's possessions, but their reputation, credibility, and even their freedom. When someone chooses to invent or distort a story to make another person look guilty, they are attempting to shift power in a situation where, by rights, they have none. In the case of a neighbor calling the police with a fabricated claim about being threatened over a motorcycle, what might look at first like a petty quarrel quickly becomes a legal matter with serious consequences. False accusations cross the line from neighborhood drama into an abuse of authority because they misuse law enforcement resources, waste community trust, and put the accused in an unfair position of defense. To understand the danger of false accusations, one must first consider how the legal system responds to them. When police are called, they cannot dismiss the situation based on assumptions or personal bias. They are obligated to investigate. That means the accused person immediately faces scrutiny, questioning, potential detainment, and the risk of their name being recorded in association with criminal activity. Even if the truth comes out quickly, the initial harm has already been done. Neighbors may gossip, professional relationships may suffer, and the stress on the individual can be significant. This is why accountability for those who make false reports is so important. Filing a false police report is a crime in itself because it wastes public resources and undermines the trust we must have in law enforcement. But beyond legal consequences, there is also a moral issue at stake. Making a false accusation is fundamentally dishonest, and dishonesty corrodes the fabric of community life. If people begin to believe that lies can be weaponized to gain control over others, the entire sense of safety in a neighborhood breaks down. Imagine living in a place where, at any moment, a neighbor might invent a claim to punish you for saying no, for holding boundaries, or for simply owning something they want. That kind of environment fosters fear, resentment, and division instead of cooperation. The truth is, honesty is not just a personal virtue, it is a community necessity. Without it, trust disappears, and without trust, communities cannot thrive. There is also a psychological dimension to false accusations worth considering. For the person accused, the emotional toll can be heavy. Feelings of frustration, anger, and helplessness can set in because one is forced to defend against something that never even happened. Unlike an honest mistake or misunderstanding, a false accusation is intentional. It is an attempt to manipulate reality. For the accuser, though, this tactic often backfires. While they may gain a momentary sense of control or attention, once the truth is revealed, their credibility collapses. People remember who weaponized lies, and trust once lost is very difficult to regain. Education plays a crucial role here. Children, for instance, must be taught early on that dishonesty and exaggeration for personal gain are harmful not only to others, but also to themselves. Teaching the difference between seeking help honestly and manipulating authority dishonestly is a vital lesson in accountability. Adults, too, must remind themselves that accountability is not optional. It is part of living in a society where law and order exist to protect fairness. To misuse those systems for selfish purposes is to erode the very protections one may someday rely on. In the specific case of calling the police with a fabricated claim during a professional briefing with the state attorney, the falsehood was exposed quickly because the accused had credibility, composure, and the backing of professional duty. But imagine if the timing had been different, or if the person accused had not been in such a visible professional role. The outcome could have been far worse, with potential legal entanglements, financial costs, and lingering reputational harm. This is why false accusations are never harmless. They have real potential to damage lives, and the law treats them accordingly. Ultimately, accountability must be the anchor when discussing false accusations. Those who lie must face consequences, both legal and social, to deter similar behavior. Communities must reject this kind of manipulation by standing behind truth and transparency. And individuals must commit to protecting their own credibility by remaining honest, even in difficult disputes. The lesson was clear. When people choose lies over truth, they may gain a fleeting advantage, but when the truth surfaces, and it almost always does, the cost to their integrity is far greater than whatever they hoped to gain. Standing firm against false accusations, then, is not only about protecting oneself, it is about protecting the principle that honesty must always be stronger than entitlement.
Law and authority play interesting roles in everyday conflicts because they are designed to bring order, fairness, and clarity in situations where emotions often run high. But when authority is invoked inappropriately, as with a false police call, the law has a way of turning an unexpected twist into a powerful teaching moment. In the case of the Harley incident, what started as a demand rooted in entitlement quickly escalated when a false claim was made. Yet, because the accused was in the middle of briefing the state attorney, a situation involving the very core of legal authority, the truth unfolded in a way that highlighted the difference between abusing authority and respecting it. Authority exists for the purpose of protecting rights and maintaining justice, not for satisfying personal grievances. When Karen decided to call the police, she attempted to use the authority of law enforcement as a weapon to enforce her personal will. That misuse illustrates a common misunderstanding about authority. It is not something we can bend for our convenience. It is an impartial system meant to protect both sides fairly. Law enforcement officers are trained to look beyond emotion and accusation, to gather facts and to evaluate evidence. When they arrived at the scene, they were met not with an aggressive motorcycle owner, but with someone calmly briefing a state attorney, an official who represents the highest standards of law in the state. The irony of that moment created the unexpected twist. Instead of finding a threat, the officers found a legal professional actively engaged in serving justice. This twist underscores an important lesson about the balance between law and personal behavior. While individuals may think of the law as distant or abstract, it is very present in our daily lives, especially when conflicts arise. Every time we make a choice to respect or disrespect boundaries, to tell the truth or lie, to escalate or resolve, we are either aligning ourselves with the law's purpose or placing ourselves at odds with it. Authority, when used correctly, safeguards fairness. Authority, when abused, has a way of exposing dishonesty. When Karen decided to call the police, she attempted to use the authority of law enforcement as a weapon to enforce her personal will. That misuse illustrates a common misunderstanding about authority. It is not something we can bend for our convenience. It is an impartial system meant to protect both sides fairly. Law enforcement officers are trained to look beyond emotion and accusation, to gather facts, and to evaluate evidence. When they arrived at the scene, they were met not with an aggressive motorcycle owner, but with someone calmly briefing a state attorney, an official who represents the highest standards of law in the state. The irony of that moment created the unexpected twist. Instead of finding a threat, the officers found a legal professional actively engaged in serving justice. This twist underscores an important lesson about the balance between law and personal behavior. While individuals may think of the law as distant or abstract, it is very present in our daily lives, especially when conflicts arise. Every time we make a choice to respect or disrespect boundaries, to tell the truth or lie, to escalate or resolve, we are either aligning ourselves with the law's purpose or placing ourselves at odds with it. Authority, when used correctly, safeguards fairness. Authority, when abused, has a way of exposing dishonesty. Karen's decision to misuse that authority backfired because the system she tried to manipulate was built on truth, evidence, and accountability. There is also an educational point here about the nature of unexpected outcomes. Often, those who rely on entitlement or dishonesty expect authority to serve them without question. They assume that calling in police or legal intervention will automatically tilt the scales in their favor. But the law is not designed to favor entitlement. It is designed to uncover facts. That is why so many attempts at manipulation eventually unravel. Authority does not bend as easily as entitlement assumes. This is where the twist occurs. Instead of empowering the dishonest, it strengthens the hand of the honest. For communities and individuals, this carries a broader lesson. We cannot control every situation, nor can we predict every conflict. But we can control how we conduct ourselves and how closely we align our actions with integrity. When conflicts reach the point of legal involvement, those who have acted responsibly and truthfully often find that authority reinforces their position. On the other hand, those who attempt to twist authority for selfish gain discover that their actions collapse under scrutiny. The Harley incident was not just about a bike. It became a lesson in how truth and composure can turn what looked like a disadvantage into a decisive advantage. Furthermore, authority demands respect, but respect must be mutual. Communities respect law enforcement when officers act with fairness and professionalism. Citizens earn respect from authority when they act with honesty and composure. That relationship is fragile but essential. Misusing the law for personal gain undermines this relationship by burdening officers with false claims and creating unnecessary tension between neighbors. But when authority is applied correctly, it restores balance. In this case, the officers recognized the truth, dismissed the false claim, and allowed the rightful owner to carry on with his professional responsibilities. That resolution reinforced the authority of law not as a weapon for entitlement, but as a shield for truth. The unexpected twist in this story, then, is not simply that the false accuser was caught, but that the law itself revealed its strength through fairness. What was intended as a tactic of control became, instead, a demonstration of accountability. This shows us that authority, though often feared, should not be seen as something to avoid if we are in the right. Rather, it should be trusted, because when wielded correctly, it has the power to protect those who act responsibly and expose those who misuse it. In the end, the incident becomes a teaching moment. Law is not the tool of entitlement, it is the ally of truth.
Standing firm against entitlement is one of the most important lessons to take away from the Harley incident because it represents more than just a disagreement over property. It represents the challenge of maintaining personal boundaries in a world where not everyone respects them. Entitlement, by its very nature, seeks to erode those boundaries. It is the belief that someone is owed access, reward, or privilege without having earned it. When faced with such an attitude, people often feel pressure to give in simply to avoid conflict. But giving in rarely solves the problem. Instead, it encourages further entitlement and creates a cycle where boundaries are ignored again and again. The greater lesson is that standing firm, even when uncomfortable, protects not only your rights, but also the respect necessary for communities to function. In the context of the Harley story, the refusal to hand over the motorcycle was not an act of selfishness, it was an act of responsibility. To allow an untrained teenager to use a powerful motorcycle would not only have been reckless, but potentially dangerous. Yet entitlement does not consider responsibility, it only considers desire. That is why saying no was essential. It communicated clearly that ownership carries responsibilities that cannot be transferred simply because someone demands it. It also demonstrated that protecting what is yours is not about greed, but about accountability. Accountability to yourself, to the investment you've made, and to the safety of others. Standing firm against entitlement also teaches resilience. When people face false accusations or manipulative tactics, the temptation can be to cave in, just to make the problem go away. But caving in does not build strength. It builds dependence in those who demand and resentment in those who give. By refusing to yield to unfair pressure, individuals send a message that boundaries are real, that respect is expected, and that dishonesty will not achieve results. In the long run, this fosters healthier interactions. People may not like being told no, but they eventually learn to respect it. There is also a cultural and social dimension to this lesson. Entitlement is not just a personal flaw, it is often reinforced by environments that reward demand over discipline. Communities that tolerate entitlement risk eroding fairness. If one neighbor can demand another's property and escalate when denied, what stops others from doing the same? If false accusations can be used as leverage without consequences, what happens to trust within the neighborhood? By standing firm, individuals not only protect themselves, but also uphold the standards of fairness that communities rely on. It sends the message that entitlement will not be normalized and respect will remain the guiding principle. On a personal level, resisting entitlement is more than just defending property. It is about protecting dignity. When someone insists that they deserve what you have simply because they want it, they are not just disregarding your belongings, they are disregarding your effort, your discipline, and your choices. To give in to such demands is to allow your dignity to be undermined. By standing firm, you affirm that your work, your sacrifices, and your responsibilities matter. You assert that respect must be mutual, and that value cannot be taken without acknowledgement of effort. The Harley story illustrates this powerfully. Entitlement led to escalation. Escalation led to falsehood, and falsehood led to exposure. But the outcome was determined not by the demand or the lie, but by the refusal to yield. By standing firm, the rightful owner not only kept his motorcycle, but also his integrity. The entitled, in contrast, lost credibility. This contrast makes the lesson clear. When entitlement collides with firm boundaries, it is entitlement that eventually collapses. The broader takeaway is that standing firm against entitlement is not about confrontation for its own sake. It is about preserving fairness, dignity, and respect in every area of life. Whether in neighborhoods, workplaces, or families, people thrive when effort is rewarded and boundaries are respected. Entitlement may be loud, dramatic, and demanding, but it cannot withstand the strength of calm, consistent boundaries backed by integrity. In a society where respect for personal rights is foundational, standing firm is not just a choice, it is a responsibility.